Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh and good day to everyone. So in this video, I'm going to demonstrate this brain model. So this is the cerebrum, this is the cerebellum, and this is the brainstem. Okay, please ignore this rubber band. This is to avoid the model from falling apart. Okay, so first let's orientate this model, where is the anterior and posterior part of the model. Okay, there are three structures that can be identified to determine the anterior and posterior part of the model. The first one is this structure. This is the cerebellum. So the cerebellum will be located inferiorly and posteriorly. So this area is the posterior part of the brain. Okay, next one is this lobe. This is the temporal lobe, and as you can see, this is the rounded end of the temporal lobe. So it must be directed anteriorly. Okay, the rounded end of the temporal lobe directed anteriorly. So this area is the anterior part of the brain. Okay, the third structure is this structure. This is known as olfactory bulb. The olfactory bulb is located anteriorly. So this is anterior part of the cerebrum. Okay, now let's talk about the surface, borders and folds. Okay, so this is the superolateral surface of the cerebrum, and then this is the inferior surface of the cerebrum. The inferior surface is divided into two areas. The anterior part is known as the orbital part of the inferior surface, while the posterior part here is known as the tentorial part of the inferior surface, while this one is the medial surface of the cerebral hemisphere. Okay, now let's talk about the borders of the cerebral hemisphere. Okay, so this is the inferolateral border. This is the superomedial border. And this is the medial orbital border. And this is the medial occipital border. What about the poles? This is the frontal pole, this is the temporal pole, and this is the occipital pole. Okay, so this is the right cerebral hemisphere and this is the left cerebral hemisphere. So both cerebral hemispheres is separated by the longitudinal cerebral fissure, and the cerebrum is separated from the cerebellum by the transverse cerebral fissure. Okay, right now I have the right cerebral hemisphere. Okay, let's identify the sulci and gyri on this model. Sometimes it's a little bit tricky to identify the sulci and gyri because of the convoluted structures of the gyri and sulci here. Well, let's start with the central sulcus. So let's find the central sulcus. This is the beginning of the central sulcus. It begins for a short distance at the superomedial border, and then it travels downward and forward. Okay, so this is the landmark for the central sulcus. It travels downward and forward towards the lateral sulcus. So this central sulcus separates the frontal lobe from the parietal lobe. Anterior to the central sulcus, we have the precentral sulcus, and this is the precentral gyrus. Next, this is the superior frontal sulcus, and this is the inferior frontal sulcus. So we have the superior frontal gyrus, middle frontal gyrus, and inferior frontal gyrus. Okay. From the central sulcus, posterior to it is the postcentral sulcus, and this one should be the postcentral gyrus. Next is the intraparietal sulcus, which divides the parietal lobe into superior parietal lobule and inferior parietal lobule. So around here could be the supramarginal gyrus, and posterior to it is the angular gyrus. Okay, move on to the temporal lobe. This is the lateral sulcus or sylvian fissure, which separates the frontal and parietal lobe from the temporal lobe. So we have the superior temporal sulcus and inferior temporal sulcus. So here this is superior temporal gyrus, middle temporal gyrus, and inferior temporal gyrus. What about the occipital lobe? Okay, so this is the parieto-occipital sulcus. This is the calcarine sulcus, and this is the lateral occipital sulcus. So lateral occipital sulcus divide the occipital pole into superior occipital gyrus and inferior occipital gyrus. Since we have the parieto-occipital sulcus here, this is the arcus parieto-occipitalis. Okay, let's proceed with the sulci and gyri at the medial surface. So here we have this structure here, which is known as the corpus callosum. So here this is the callosal sulcus. Superior to it we have the cingulate sulcus. So here we have the cingulate gyrus. Around the beginning of the central sulcus, we have the paracentral lobule. So here is the medial frontal gyrus. Okay, so here we have the parieto-occipital sulcus, and this is the calcarine sulcus. So here this is the cuneus, and here the quadrangular area here is known as precuneus. Okay, move on to the inferior surface. Okay, this is the orbital part of the inferior surface, and this is the tentorial part of the inferior surface. So this is the stem of the lateral sulcus, which separates these two. Alright, let's start with the orbital part of the inferior surface. So this is the olfactory bulb. So the olfactory sulcus is beneath the olfactory bulb, and this is the orbital sulcus, which separates this area into anterior, posterior, medial, and lateral orbital gyri. Okay, move on to the tentorial part. Here the sulci and gyri is a little bit tricky because they are not well, how can I say, it is not as clear as you can see on the diagram. Sometimes the sulci won't be straight or continuous. Okay, so the first one, what we can see here, this is the rhinal sulcus. Okay, rhinal sulcus, and then this is the collateral sulcus. Okay, and then this is the occipito-temporal sulcus. Okay, so this is the hook-like gyrus, which is known as the uncus. Posterior to it is the parahippocampal gyrus, and then here this is the medial occipito-temporal gyrus or lingual gyrus. Okay, next, this gyrus here is the lateral occipital temporal gyrus or fusiform gyrus, and last one here is the inferior temporal gyrus. Okay, now let's talk about this structure. So this is the corpus callosum, and the parts of the corpus callosum are, this is the rostrum, this is the genu, body or trunk, and splenium. This is the lamina terminalis. This is the fornix or commissure of fornix. This is the anterior commissure, and this is the posterior commissure.